So I literally just got finished filming the latest Impact Wrestling news video that is uploading at the time of recording right now. But there's some more real breaking news when it comes to Impact Wrestling, and it's not really surprising, but it's the confirmation of what we've been talking about here on the channel, and certainly a lot of Impact Wrestling fans and just fans of pro wrestling in general, AEW fans as well, have been talking about the last few days or the last, I guess, week or so, and that is Don Callis' future with Impact Wrestling, where it has been now confirmed, not officially by Impact, I must stress, but certainly by a reputable outlet. It has been confirmed by Fightful that Don Callis is no longer an executive in any capacity with Impact Wrestling or Anthem Sports and Entertainment. It would appear that with Don Callis' removal from the Anthem website as an executive of Impact Wrestling, that is no coincidence, it's no storyline, it's no kayfabe, it's no accident or anything like that. Don Callis officially is no longer an executive in any capacity with Impact Wrestling or Anthem and Sports and Entertainment. Now, this was first reported by Fightful Select, which is Fightful's Patreon service. Be sure to check that out. They do a really good job, a lot of real exclusive information. They've been first for, gosh, so many stories over the course of the last few days or so. It's certainly been a noteworthy and newsworthy couple of days, hasn't it? Whether it's AEW and their new programming, their move to TBS, or the releases of the NXT talent yesterday, and Fightful were all over that with their Select service. So if you haven't, be sure to subscribe. I am. It's very, very good. A lot of great insider and exclusive information, and they are reporting a confirmation that Don Callis is no longer an executive in any capacity with Impact Wrestling and Anthem Sports and Entertainment. Now, as I mentioned, it was noted earlier this week that Callis is expected to remain as an on-screen talent with Kenny Omega wherever he goes. So that does mean he's going to remain on Impact Television as for now, or at least for the amount of time that Kenny Omega is there. As I mentioned yesterday, we did a video talking about this yesterday at the most recent set of Impact Wrestling television tapings, which lasted about 4 or 5 days. Kenny Omega and Don Callis were only present for the first day of Impact Wrestling's television tapings. They filmed their content, they filmed their matches, their promos, their vignettes, all of that stuff, and then they were not there for the remaining 3 days as they then traveled to Jacksonville to be part of the AEW, I guess just to be back in Jacksonville for Kenny Omega to do his executive vice president jobs for AEW, and I guess to get ready for whenever they're needed for Impact Wrestling, for AEW television tapings rather. I don't think AEW was live last night. I think it was taped, wasn't it? So they weren't there live for tapings, but they weren't present at the Impact Wrestling television tapings. Now, a little bit extra that Fightful are discussing here as part of this report on their Fightful Select service is that most talent that Fightful have spoken to have said that this doesn't come as much as of a surprise. This confirmation and this move with Don Callis moving, I guess, officially to becoming an AEW talent and no longer have any affiliation with Impact Wrestling as an executive, just as a talent while Kenny Omega is there. That's not a surprise to many Impact Wrestling talents, as Scott D'Amore has pretty much led things since pretty well the beginning. That's very interesting, isn't it? That already we're seeing a little bit of spin, if you will. We're seeing a little bit of spin on the situation that a lot of people, a lot of talents, and again, we don't know which talents they've spoken to. We don't know which talents are saying these things, but it certainly is interesting that already you're getting some talent saying, look, it's not much of a surprise. The one true leader here has always been Scott D'Amore. He's been the real executive vice president, because you have to remember, Don Callis, as an executive with the company, he's a co-executive vice president. It's him and Scott D'Amore. Now, what the future is now, and we've spoken about this briefly, but I guess this is a good position now that we've got at least one reputable outlet confirming it. What happens next with Don Callis' position? Does his duties and responsibilities, do they just get absorbed by Scott D'Amore? Does he suddenly just take up the title of Executive Vice President of Impact Wrestling, and then everything runs through him and Ed Nordholm going forward? That's a possibility. We stated before, and I know a lot of you guys that watch the Impact Wrestling content that we do here on the channel, certainly in the comments section below, have said that you think that possibly Tommy Dreamer could be someone that steps up and assumes Don Callis' roles and duties in Impact Wrestling as an executive. Of course, Tommy Dreamer is very influential backstage in Impact Wrestling right now. He's got he wears a lot of hats. Certainly, he still is an on-screen talent, not as much anymore. Certainly, he's taken a step back from being an on-screen talent, but he's a producer, a backstage agent. He's part of the creative team for Impact Wrestling as well. So a lot of the storylines and the contents and the segments that you see on Impact Wrestling have a lot to do with Tommy Dreamer. I know he was very influential behind the Wrestle House segments on Impact Wrestling last year, the very successful and critically acclaimed Wrestle House segments. I think he was influential in the Who Shot Johnny Bravo saga. Not to say that he's just doing this sort of lighthearted comedic stuff, but for certainly the elements over the course of the last 12 months that were very outside of the box, a lot of people credited Tommy Dreamer for that success. And in addition to that as well, as I mentioned, he's part of the creative team, and he's a producer, he's a backstage agent for Impact. And a lot of people have put 2 and 2 together and said, well, if Tommy Dreamer's this influential anyway, and he's doing this great work anyway, then why wouldn't he just assume Don Callis' position in Impact Wrestling? I don't know if it's as simple as that, to be honest. It might be a case of, if what these talents are saying to Fightful is accurate, then maybe it's not that much of a transition anyway. Maybe a lot of people were going to Scott D'Amore for all of their concerns or their bookings or their creative disputes or whatever it may be. There's certainly so much that falls under the job description of being an executive vice president. If what these talents are saying is accurate, then a lot of people were doing this anyway with Scott D'Amore, even when Don Callis did have an executive role with the company. Now, for me, when I hear that part of it, I don't know. That seems not sour grapes. It's not fair to say that, but I think it's very unfair to Don Callis that once he's now leaving the company, and the only reason he's there is because Kenny Omega is there. If Kenny Omega wasn't there, Don Callis would just be in AEW right now. The only reason that he's still there and he's part of the on-screen product is because he's a manager for Kenny Omega. I don't know. We haven't had any official confirmation about the AEW deal that I would assume he's getting or he has already signed. So I don't know about that, but I think it's unfair that now Don Callis is out of the door in terms of an executive position. I feel it's unfair to say, well, he wasn't doing anything anyway, and he wasn't that much of an executive and all that kind of stuff. That feels very easy. That once someone's no longer in a position of power, to then suddenly the claws come out and start jumping in on him. Look, if he was in an executive position for 3 years, him and Scott D'Amore, they were announced as co-executive vice presidents of Impact Wrestling at the end of 2017. Whilst they've been there in those positions, Impact Wrestling has had a bit of a resurgence, and I found it funny that whenever we talk, there's a couple of things I found funny about this. One, I've seen a couple of comments, and it is the minority, and you shouldn't really pay attention to it, but yeah, it is what it is. I saw one comment that said, why are you continuing to talk about this? It doesn't matter. And like I said yesterday, that is so far from the truth. When an executive leaves any company, whether they're big, they're small, whether they're a pro wrestling company, whether they're a Fortune 500 company on the New York Stock Exchange, whether they're on Wall Street, whether they're whoever, whenever an executive or a high-ranking official leaves a company, that is a big news story. It is a big news story. That is a big story because that person previously had significant influence and significant power. They were someone who had authority in that company, and now they're no longer there. There is a story as to why they've left. There is a story as to who replaces them. There's a story as to the feeling within people underneath them as to their thoughts about it, and there is a story behind all of that. So it's a major story. It's a major story that one of the Impact Wrestling aren't the biggest pro wrestling company in the world or North America anymore. They're not. They've got a lot of history. You know, they were founded in 2002. They've had about 10 million lives, nearly gone bankrupt 10 million times as well. But they do have a lot of history. And are they as big as WWE? Of course not. Are they as big as AEW? No. Are they as big as New Japan or AAA? No. But they're still a relatively big company in the sense that reputable stars want to work for a company like Impact, or there are names in Impact that you know of. There are names in Impact that are being courted by WWE and AEW. There are lots of stars right now in WWE or AEW that at one point were with Impact Wrestling. There are always stars that when their contract comes up, WWE are interested or AEW are interested. Pretty much 75% of the AEW roster has appeared for Impact Wrestling at one point. So to say that it's not a big news story or they're not a big company is so far from reality. So far from reality, and that's just social media and sometimes YouTube comments at the end of the day. But thanks for the engagement, thanks for the interaction. The other kind of thing I've seen about this is the feeling that it doesn't make much of a difference, and it might not make much of a difference, to be honest. And the stories that we've seen previously, or certainly the reports that have come out this week, are that, one, people expected this, people have expected this for a while. And in recent months, Don Callis hasn't been really that much involved in Impact Wrestling television tapings apart from being a talent. And in recent months, talent has just been going to Scott D'Amore for all of this kind of stuff. And I mentioned before, it was significant duties. Duties have been reduced significantly, and people weren't sure what the situation is, but they weren't surprised. And there was a general feeling going back to December that Don Callis was going to leave Impact Wrestling and become a full-time talent for AEW. And I think this is an important point to discuss as well, is we don't know how long this is going on for. I mean, people have only noticed, I guess, right, over the course of the last week or so, that Don Callis was no longer listed on Anthem's website. I mean, do we have an official confirmation as to when he was removed? I don't know. Going back to that report last year, and I like to bring it up because at first I did criticize it because I did feel that there were holes in it, and I still do to an extent. That was that report by Wrestling Inc. that said that the Impact Wrestling and AEW working relationship was not going to be that extensive. It was just a one-off. Kenny Omega was just appearing on Impact as a favor to Don Callis for Callis doing the commentary at Full Gear and then appearing on the Winter is Coming edition of Dynamite, and don't get your hopes up, essentially. And how wrong has that been proven to be? And part of that report was also saying that Don Callis was expected to leave Impact and to sign with AEW as a talent. Now, part of that report said that Don Callis' contract with Impact Wrestling was up in January of 2021. And people like myself said, if you're an executive, that means you're an employee of a big company like Anthem. If you're an executive and an employee of a big company like Anthem, you don't tend to have just like an independent contract that can expire. You're an employee. You have benefits. You have insurance, and you have a notice period as being an employee of the company, and you have to give your notice. You have to work that notice, and then you can leave. That's how it works. Now, the thing I kind of look at it now is that maybe we misinterpreted it, or maybe the initial report misinterpreted it in the sense that the expectation came out in December that he was going to leave Impact and his contract expired in January. Maybe it was a case of the expectation was that he was going to leave because he handed his notice in December, and that his notice period was, say, a month. If it was say the 4th of December and he handed in his notice on the 4th of December, and then his notice period ended on, say, the 4th of January, that would make a lot of sense. So maybe it was just the way that it was conveyed by, I don't know, the sources or the report or whatever. Maybe that was the issue there. But there was certainly smoke to that fire, and this has been a story that when we first spoke about it here on the channel a couple of days ago, my initial reaction was, we'll have to wait and see, give it a few days, because it is a big story. It's a big story, and when there is a story this big and someone in a position of authority, an executive or whatever in the company, when they leave the websites and the reputable journalists, whether it is Sean Ross Sapp, whether it's Nick Houseman, whether it's Dave Meltzer, whether it's Gary Cassidy, whether it's whoever, Mike Johnson, Wade Keller, you name it, whether it's any of those guys, when a big story like this appears to be bubbling under the surface, they will reach out to their various sources. So like I said at the time, give it a few days, because this one will continue to simmer, and we will find out more. Because if Don Callis was still an executive in the company, Impact would just come out and say, oh, he's an executive. Yeah, it was an admin error on the Anthem website, all that kind of stuff. They could easily say that, and they didn't. That spoke volumes anyway, to be honest. That spoke volumes as to really what the situation was anyway with Don Callis and Impact. And now it's been confirmed. And I think the only reason possibly why Impact haven't confirmed this themselves officially is because they're smart, in the sense that they probably realize, okay, people are talking about this now. Don Callis is going to leave, and he's no longer an executive with the company, and he's going to appear on Impact Wrestling television for as long as Kenny Omega's here, because he's Kenny Omega's manager for AEW, and he is an AEW contracted talent now, and he's just a talent and all that kind of stuff. But people are talking about this, and we do have a small audience on Access TV. And to be honest, probably 99% of the audience that watches us on Access TV is a smart audience. They read online, they read social media, they read the dirt sheets, they read the websites and all that kind of stuff. So the majority of that audience knows that Don Callis is no longer an executive vice president with Impact Wrestling or Anthem. They know that's a fact. So what do we do with that information? We weave it into the product. We weave it into the storylines, and we try and muddy the waters a little bit. We try and confuse people. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. I mean, it's Thursday today, isn't it? I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if tonight on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, we have some form of confrontation with Don Callis and Scott D'Amore, whereby Scott D'Amore says, you know what, enough's enough. Of course, at Impact Under Siege this past weekend, Sami Callihan arguably had the number one contenders match won in the main event. Who came out? The Good Brothers, Kyle Anderson and Doc Gallows, at the behest of Don Callis, came out, possibly sent them out because they didn't want Sami Callihan to face Kenny Omega. And maybe Scott D'Amore can say, look, enough's enough. I warned you and I asked you before. You can't be impartial. You can't be an executive of Impact Wrestling whilst also being the manager, the invisible hand of the Impact World Champion, the AEW World Champion, and the AAA Mega Champion. You can't do it. And it's unacceptable. I told you to pick a side. You've obviously picked your side. I've had a word with the other executives and the board of directors in Anthem Sports and Entertainment, and we have decided that you are no longer fit to be an executive with Impact Wrestling. Therefore, you have been released from your duties as an executive. Don Callis, you are fired. They could do something like that, and then officially they can confirm it, or Anthem can release a statement saying that Don Callis is no longer with the company or something like that. They can do something like that, and to me, that is a good way of weaving reality into a storyline. The issue with that will then be that people will say, see, I told you it was a work, I told you it was kayfabe. But if all of these outlets are reporting the same thing, all of these outlets right now are singing off the same hymn sheet. Realistically, all of these outlets are now saying the same thing, that he's no longer an executive. And the reason he was removed from the Anthem website is because he's not an executive anymore. Now, as I mentioned, we haven't had any official confirmation from Impact, and we certainly haven't had any official confirmation from AEW. Given that it's Thursday today, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe when The Observer comes out tomorrow, Dave Meltzer has more on this. I wouldn't be surprised if Fightful have more on this. They've been really close to this story over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, and it certainly is an interesting one. And what I don't want to see, and I hope this isn't the case, I just don't want to see these reports now coming out saying that, oh, he did nothing when he was with Impact Wrestling. It was all Scott D'Amore, and it was all Ed Nordholm and all that kind of stuff. He didn't contribute anything, because that's not true. He was in a position of authority and power with Impact Wrestling for, 4 years, 3.5 years or so. And during that period of time, and this is something that I've been criticized for saying, but it's true, in that during that period of time, Impact has seen a bit of a resurgence. The product is pretty good right now, and it's better than it's been in a while. And I know people will look at this and say, well, it's not the Impact Wrestling or the TNA Wrestling of the Spike TV days of 2006, 2007, 2008, even during the Hogan Bischoff years, which are, to say the least, but the ratings, I guess, were kind of there in comparison to today's ratings anyway. And I know people will say they're seen by a fraction of people on Access TV. They're seen by 150,000 people. They used to bring in 1.5 million viewers on Spike TV and all that kind of stuff. How can you say that they did a good job? The reason they did a good job, and Don Callis did a good job whilst he was an executive with Impact Wrestling, and why Scott D'Amore and Ed Nordholm and everyone there continues to do a good job with Impact Wrestling, is this was a company and a brand that was dead. It was dead. There's so much damage had been done to this company. It had nearly gone bankrupt like 5 times, and you had all this controversy, even when Anthem purchased it, and the Jeff Jarrett and the GFW stuff, and Jarrett having to go to rehab, and the Alberto Del Rio stuff when he was there, all that kind of stuff. It was just a complete mess, and people had truly given up on it. There had been a lot of people, obviously, that stopped watching Impact once it got moved off Spike TV, and a lot of people didn't even know it's around. I've had that comment on the channel tons of time. What, TNA Wrestling still exists? I didn't even know. And I know people will say, well, their audience is tiny and all that kind of stuff. But Impact Wrestling in April for their Rebellion pay-per-view had the best pay-per-view they have had since Anthem purchased the product. Since they purchased the company. Since Anthem purchased the company in 2017, they haven't done a pay-per-view that has had more buys or more streams or more trends or anything like that than they have ever had. So they are doing something right. And are they ever going to get back to the point where they get 1.5 million viewers on TV? Probably not. Chances are very much against it. Certainly while they're on Access TV. The irony about Access TV is that no one can access it because it's so out of the way and not many people have it on their cable systems or whatever. So as long as Impact stays on there, it's not going to happen. But if you watch the product, and if you watch AEW, and because of their working relationships with New Japan Pro Wrestling, with AEW, they are having more exposure than they've had in a while. And it's reflected by their success of their recent pay-per-views, and I have no doubt that Slammiversary will also be a success this year in the same vein that it was last year. Impact Wrestling Slammiversary was trending worldwide in July. Do you know the last time that's happened for Impact? Prior to that, a really, really long time, because people didn't know it existed. And it's that rebuilding of the product and building up talent that's now with WWE or AEW in a very successful manner. It's that kind of legacy that Don Callis and Scott D'Amore and Ed Nordholm and everyone that's in Impact right now in positions of power, whether they're behind the scenes or whatever, that's their legacy. They have done a really good job. So I don't want to, see this sort of stuff of, well, he's not going to be missed, he didn't do a good job. That's rubbish. And if you know Don Callis, I don't know him personally. I know his story from being in WWE and ECW and all that kind of stuff, but this is a guy that stepped away from the business. And he went into his own business. I think he got an MBA and all that kind of stuff. He's a very intelligent man and a successful businessman. And to imply that he hasn't, he didn't bring anything to Impact, that's not true. That's not true. And I know people are kind of upset that he would leave an executive position, a position of power in a company, and go to just become a talent with AEW, but we don't know the full situation. He might just be like, you know what, that executive life and that grind, because when you're an executive in a pro wrestling company, that's 7 days a week stuff. That is constant. And he might realize, you know what, I've made my money being an executive, and it's a really good financial offer for a fraction of the work. I get to hang out with someone that's a very close friend of mine, and I just get to go out there and cut promos and have fun. And I don't have the added pressure of being an executive. And I get to be on TNT or TBS soon every week in a company that's certainly growing in AEW. And he goes, you know what, maybe it's just better for me and better for my family. And if that's the case, more power to him. So I'm sure we'll hear more about this in the coming days, but it has been confirmed by Fightful. They're the first to report this officially. I'm sure Impact or Anthem will confirm this soon, but Don Callis is no longer an executive with Impact Wrestling or Anthem Sports and Entertainment. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.